Hello, and welcome back to the Irish Tennis Updates podcast. My name is Adam, your host. This week I have been chatting to Larry Jurovich. Larry is a Canadian coach and he currently operates three tennis centres in Canada. Earlier on in his career, Larry spent a number of years in Ireland, where he worked with players such as James McGee and James Cluskey. We talk all about Larry's journey, which has also brought him to working in countries including the UK and China. And finally, more recently, Larry is currently offering a tennis scholarship to two Irish juniors who are over in his centres in Canada at the moment, training and competing. This is a great opportunity, and we talk about this and the future of Larry's international tennis in his academies. I hope you enjoy listening to this episode and hearing all about Larry's journey in tennis coaching. And here we go. Here is Larry Jurovich.
All right, Larry, how are things? A big welcome to the show. How are things with you?
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Everything's great. Yeah, looking forward to our chat.
Great, absolutely. Yeah, let's get straight into it. And I know that you are currently based in Canada, where you have been for a few years. And I think a part of how we got in touch is that you've recently have launched kind of a bit of a scholarship program, which I guess you'll explain now with bit of a link with Ireland. So I guess do you want to just get into explaining a little bit about what that is and how that came about?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm originally from Canada, and after bouncing around doing a lot of different jobs, I moved back here in 2009. And that started a long process. It took 6 years, but in 2015, we opened a new tennis facility here, just in sort of the outskirts of Vancouver. And the goal always was to basically get off the road and not have to do 150,000 air miles a year anymore. We wanted to live in Vancouver, where we're from, but at the same time, all the tennis in Vancouver is dominated by private clubs and really sort of posh places where junior development isn't a priority. So it really became obvious that if we were going to do what we want to do, that we'd have to build our own center. So, long story short, we spent 6 years getting that center built, opened in 2015. And for the last 6 years, we've been working on building the program. And, we're now at a position where we've got three facilities. Between the three facilities, we have about 1,400 kids in the program. But as far as the sort of, let's call it high performance program, I don't love that terminology, but the high end of the program is getting close to 60 kids. And we had a handful of kids be top 5 and top 10 in Canada this year in the national championship. So what we found is that, as we've developed our player base and the quality and numbers have been going up and up, it seemed like it was the right time now to try to take the next step and develop sort of, let's call it a more international academy. And so we've done this whole branding piece around that, but more importantly, we've been reaching out, and it was obvious to reach out to Ireland. I still have nice relationships with a bunch of the people that I worked with back there in the day. And so I reached out to some people, and Garrett Barry and James Cluskey were instrumental in connecting me with the two families that have come over here, and we've added them to our team. So now it's great for here, because as much as when you're in Ireland, I know you always feel like you're in this kind of small little country. It's funny because from Canada, we see Ireland as being in Europe, and Europe is the center of tennis. But in Ireland, it sometimes feel like you're a little bit off to the side. And it feels like that in Vancouver too. On the west coast of North America, it's not the same population density as the East Coast, never mind Europe. And so to be able to bring in some international players to add to our player base, to support the environment, give more quality hitting partners, more quality training, is fantastic. And the goal is to bring our entire team to Europe for the whole summer next year, as sort of this process of going from a local community facility that's been building up over the last 6 years to a legitimate international academy. So yeah, having the two Irish guys come over was fantastic. It started off great, and we're looking forward to making this whole team international.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. And so do you have players from other countries at the moment as well, other than Ireland?
We have always had players that come and go, whether that's players that are, very successful, they're playing at a high level and they want to come in for a month or two. They'll come in and do some little training blocks with us. That's something that happens from time to time. We have kids that are college players in the US, but obviously college tennis finishes in April or May, depending on how well you do in the NCAAs. And so maybe they would come up and spend some time with us. We have had some full-time players before Sean and Jack come over. Like we had a boy Hanamichi from Chile for about a year and a half. And so it's not unprecedented, but this was the first time that it has been proactive on our end. Up until now, it's been a lot of, people reaching out and looking for a place to come. And so we're happy to house them. But this is the first time that we proactively went out and tried to build the team this way.
Great. Yeah, no, great. And just, I guess, to continue on a bit and talk about your kind of coaching journey, like you mentioned, obviously the kind of this international sense of getting people from loads of different countries, and that's kind of something that you've had all throughout your career. I know, like you've worked in a whole lot of countries. Obviously, as you said, you're from Canada. You've spent a good bit of time over in Ireland. I know you've worked in a good few other countries as well. So I guess just run me through a little bit of the different places you've worked and kind of what you've learned from different places and the differences in different places and things like that.
Sure. Yeah. We've definitely been super blessed that way. Growing up in Canada, at least in my generation, you're a hockey player. And so I was a hockey player that fell into tennis, but I was very fortunate in the right time and the right place because I ended up connecting with a gentleman named Louis Caille that you might have heard of. He's one of the real legends in the coaching world, and he took me under his wing, and I learned a lot from Louis. And I always feel like I have to start the journey that way, because almost every opportunity I've had, I can connect to Louis, because essentially what happened was I finished my coaching training in Canada. I'd reached my highest level of qualifications, and I developed a kid that had won junior nationals, and I was a young guy. I was in my early 20s, and I asked Louis what would be the next step, and he said I should go to Europe, and I have an Irish passport, so that was obvious. But Louis was actually doing some consulting for Tennis Ireland at the time, so he put me in charge of the people, or put me in contact with the people in charge of Tennis Ireland, and I just told them, look, I've got a passport, I'd love to come over anytime, and we just kind of left that as an open sort of invitation. And when Westwood Clontarf was first built in 2000, the tennis side in 2000, I was offered that job, and so I came over there. I was very young. I was only in my mid 20s at the time, or maybe 26, 27 years old at the time, had a young family. And the years in Ireland, my whole family still look back at as probably some of the most enjoyable years of our life. The academy was absolutely fantastic. I'm probably aware, but in case you're not, whether it's James McGee or James Cluskey or Darren McLaughlin, Paul Foley, even guys like Daniel Glancy were coming to the program on the weekends from the West and stuff like that. When I look back at the quality of that program, I realized just how lucky I was. I probably didn't know as much at the time as I thought I did, but a whole lot of passion and between me and the kids, and a whole lot of belief, and we just went out there and worked really hard. And I think that was my first foray into Europe. These stories could last forever, Adam, but I'll tell you this. The first summer that we went, that after I'd been there for a year, I took the team and we played some ETAs in Germany and Austria and Weiblingen and Krems. And it was crazy. We had 14 kids and we came back with 1 win and 28 losses. James McGee won 1 round in the first week, and then we lost all the other matches. And when we went to Weiblingen in Germany, I was blown away because there was a 64 main draw, 128 qualifying, and 128 pre-qualifying. So I'm like, man, this is 300 kids and they're all good. And so, getting into Ireland and by extension Europe was a critical learning for me, just to see the depth of tennis and the quality of tennis is so important as a coach, that you understand standards. And so, through that process of working with the guys in Ireland, I really developed my own standards as a coach, understanding what it would take to be successful. So Ireland was an absolute, it was that's something that we look back so fondly of. We absolutely loved it, and it was a critical step for me in understanding international tennis. So that was the big step number 1 for sure. And then from there we moved back to Canada, and I took a job in Toronto. I was running running the largest club in largest commercial club in English speaking Canada. And it was a big animal. It was, 17 courts and 17 full-time coaches, a massive program. And I was super lucky there because the general manager of that club is probably one of the best off-court sort of managers in the tennis business. And so I learned a lot about managing and all the back end side of making a tennis facility successful, that went along with the coaching piece that I learned in Ireland. And so those two things led me to a new job in England. And again, that's so closely connected to Louis Caillé, because by then he had moved to England and he had put my name up for a job there. And so I ended up moving over there to take a job, which eventually was called Head of Coach Education and Performance Management. And so at that point, I started to develop all the curriculum and give all the courses to the higher end coaches in the UK, sort of take charge of their coach education department. But they also have there, with all the LTA kind of funding machine behind it, there was 30 centers at the time around the UK that are heavily funded by the Federation to support junior development. And it was my job to supervise all those academies. And so I'd be out there working with the coaches and the players on everything from goal setting to how to, program your center right into on-court stuff and how to fix somebody's second serve. And so, I've just been so fortunate to be just given opportunity after opportunity to not only stretch myself because of the job I've been given, but to just work with some amazing people and keep learning. And so in the UK, I think, working with 30 of the top centers and all the good players and all the good kids, again, honed my own coaching. But the one thing that became obvious to me was that somehow my job had become too much about coach education. And so, coach education, I believe it's critical. I'm a huge supporter of it, but I don't love doing it myself. So it was funny that I ended up getting into that type of job almost by accident. And so I made a conscious decision after the LTA job to prioritize coaching more than coach education. And so from there, I landed a job as a national coach in Tennis China. And so I worked with them from the Asian Games in 2010 to the lead up of the 2012 Olympics. And I was working primarily with their women's team, but Fed Cup and Davis Cup. I spent 2 years full-time there. And the great part about that is that was the first time that I was full-time on tour, a lot on the WTA tour, but also the ATP tour. So that's another big learning, is you get out there and you get exposed to a whole nother new level. And so that was great. Through that process, again, it just keeps upping your standards as a coach. And at that point, I ended up connecting with a Canadian girl who started playing doubles with one of the Chinese players. And eventually when I walked away from that, I ended up working with her full-time and spent another 4 years full-time on the WTA tour as this whole club in Canada was being built. And so again, just a combination of meeting the right people, having tons of great opportunities, having tons of great learning experiences. I feel it puts me in a position now, and of course I'm getting pretty old, that eventually if you don't get wiser, you're only getting older. That's what they say, right? But at this point now, I feel like I'm in a position where I can run the tennis business side of things in a way that allows us to have 3 successful clubs, but also I've got enough experience in the player development and the coach ed side that I can make sure that we've got the strongest coaching team in Canada as far as I'm concerned. I might be a little biased, but I feel good about that, and in a real up and coming junior development program. So it's been a long journey, but it's all sort of culminated in being here, having our own center, and being super excited about what's going on. So
that's all great, Larry. And obviously the fact it is a long journey, as you said, and all the different places that it's brought you. And I guess more recently you mentioned China, which must have been totally different to the other places that you've been, which is great. And obviously you got your tour experience as well. I just want to bring you back a little bit to the time in Ireland. And you mentioned the names of some of the players that would have been kind of in the program you had, and it definitely, like a lot of those players are some of the most successful that we've had in the last few years. Like, why do you think it kind of worked so well, and it produced some of those really, really good players?
I think it was a huge combination of things. You can never understate the luck side of things. I know that when I first got there, I accepted a part-time position. Obviously, as I mentioned, I was there to run the Westwood Club in Clontarf, but I was I accepted a part-time position doing 2 days a week of Leinster squad training, and they asked me which group I'd like. They said I could take any group I wanted, and obviously I didn't know any of the Irish kids, but I picked the U14 boys because I felt like that gave me long enough with the age group that I could really make a difference. And I picked the boys, just probably being a hockey player, I had more experience being around boys than girls. Now I've got 2 daughters. That's really changed a lot over the years, but at the time, and so when I went out there, we had these squads out in Westwood Leopardstown, and I was living in Malahide with no car, training it into Clontarf every day, and getting over to Leopardstown was such a pain. And so once I started to work with this squad, the group at the time was James Cluskey, James McGee, Darren McLaughlin, and Paul Foley, and they were great kids. Everybody got along. And when I got talking to them, it turned out that all 4 of them were from North Dublin too. McGee was from Castleknock, but I mean Cluskey was from Swords, and Paul Foley was from Clontarf, and Dara's, I can never remember the area that Dara's in was called, but it's up kind of halfway between Clontarf and Malahide. It's just like, guys, why are we driving all the way to Leopardstown all the time when we're all living in the same area? And so they agreed to come over and do all their training at Westwood Clontarf. And it became obvious at the time that, as a general rule, the kids in Ireland weren't training nearly as much as would be recommended internationally. I was aware of what those numbers were. And so we very quickly turned that from a program that was, 2-hour sessions a week to the point that the kids were doing 6 days a week, 4 hours a day, and we're training for 24 hours a week, and we had a great fitness program to back that. I was doing my best with where I was at as a coach and bringing a lot of energy and passion to it. So I think it was a great group of kids that got super lucky. They all lived close to each other. They were all really pushing each other hard. I was doing my best to keep up with them. And it was just a group of people that all came together at the right time. And, it turned into something really special. I'm super proud of what that was. And I'm super proud of the relationships I still have from that time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you say that, that it is a lot of hours a week, and I guess you can see that it paid off, and those players obviously did turn into, really, really good players. So, you had the results from it, which is brilliant. And I just want to ask you mentioned earlier on about Louis Kaye and how he kind of helped, I guess, open some doors maybe for you in Europe and elsewhere. But how do you think, or what do you think you learned from him, like as a coach, in terms of like how you coached, or what do you think you learned from him on that side?
Honestly, Adam, it would be an easier list to say things I learned from somebody else, because you pick a lot of things up along the way. But Louis was a very close mentor of mine, and now I count him very fortunately as one of my close friends. And so I've spent so much time working with him. The foundation of my entire coaching methodology is based on what Louis taught me. And I had enough chance over the years to work with them to hopefully contribute a little bit to what I would always refer to as his system. But in the end, everything I do as a coach is based on what he does. If somebody's not familiar with what he does, and therefore what things I might be talking about, I say probably the most important piece, and it's interesting, we'll probably segue this conversation a little bit into Jack and Sean, who are super fortunate to have over from Ireland now. But when I'm talking to the guys, and I just ask them to describe, and I hope I'm not mischaracterizing this, but when I ask them to describe their training, it sounds like a lot of practice sets, a lot of like finding good older players to hit with and kind of push them. And it's remarkable to me how many times and how many places around the world that's what people are doing. They're just scrambling to put a program together and get enough hours and enough good hits, and hope at the end of that it turns into good tennis. And I don't believe in hope, I believe in planning, and I believe in measurable goal setting, and so I think that what Louis taught me first and foremost was the specificity of what it is to develop a tennis player. And probably the easiest one, if I since we're on a podcast, I'll tell you anecdotal one that was quite interesting, was that when I first went to China and they asked me to do some work with the Davis Cup team, the 4 potential guys that would be playing doubles. And so I went out there, and after doing a little bit of a training session on the first day, I asked the guys, they're going to play a practice set, and I gave them the goal of getting minimum 75% of their first serves in. And then, amongst other things. And then as they were playing, I charted it. And at the end, they were more like 55, 60%. And so I reported the evidence, or I reported the stats back to them. I said, just so you know, guys, you didn't meet your goal. You're 55, 60%, not 75. And this same pattern replayed itself for 4 days straight, where they just kept getting 55, 60% instead of 75. And so after 4 days, I don't know if that was too patient by me, I don't know, but after 4 days, I asked them, I said, just out of curiosity, guys, what are you doing to try to get 75%? Because so far you haven't moved off of 55, 60. And they said, well, we're hoping. And I was like, what? You're professional tennis players on the Davis Cup team, and your strategy is that hope you'll serve better tomorrow. And there was nothing specific as far as changing targets, changing your approach to the serve, anything like that, that could actually make an intentional change that would have a chance to impact the result. And I find too much of that everywhere I go. A lot of people just hoping they're going to get good just by playing a lot, and trying to scramble around finding hits. And so what Louis taught me is how to be systematic. He taught me how to systematically plan a program, how to systematically build skills. And, we don't leave anything to chance. We've got very specific goals that we think are based on the most important developmental priorities for our players. And we work hard to reach those goals. So we feel strongly at the end of the year, we've gotten better.
Yeah, so like obviously you mentioned the system and how that's kind of been the sort of the influence that, one of the influences he's had on you. And I guess maybe one of the main examples that people would think of is obviously now he's working in British doubles. And I know I would have heard of kind of the, all the success that those doubles players have, that kind of very much is a system of how you play and what you do and certain shots and certain moments and all that stuff. And, the players do it and it works. And I think that's a good example of kind of the system that he brings, or the type of system he brings, and how successful it can be. It's an interesting one. And just obviously, again, any coaches who are listening to this will know that Louis was speaking at the national conference just the other week or 1 or 2 weeks ago, which was great, to hear from him. And he's obviously, as you say, fascinating to hear from, and yeah, just an amazing guy, amazing coach. And then just to move on, Larry, I just kind of to bring you back maybe a bit earlier in your kind of coaching journey of how did you get into tennis, and how then did you move into the coaching world of it?
Well, it's a ridiculous story, really. As far as the coaching world goes, probably a less common path, but I always wanted to be a coach. I grew up as a sort of an all-round athlete. I was, a reasonable hockey player by Canadian standards. Really good hockey player by Irish standards. I don't know if you know that a little bit, but I did represent the Republic of Ireland in 2 world championships. So I've still got the jersey hanging in my TV room. But yeah, I grew up as a multi-sport athlete. Hockey was really my main passion. But I knew I was going to coach one day. I love coaching. I love the notion of helping people reach their potential. That sort of thing is what excites me. And so, I figured it'd probably be a hockey coach, because obviously that was my main sport. But in the end, in grade 12, so my senior year of high school, I didn't even realize it, but a kid on my hockey team, his dad owned a local tennis club, and there was a big snowfall, and it was a bubble. It brought the bubble down, and he said to the team that if we had come out and shoveled the snow off his bubble, he would sponsor our hockey team for the year. So we did that, and then he said, hey, anybody who plays tennis, I'll give you a free membership. And I played a little bit of tennis, not a ton, but a little bit. And so I said, yeah, I'll take that membership, because hockey practices were at midnight and 2 in the morning, so I had lots of time after school. And I started to play there nonstop because it's such a great sport. And within a few months, they offered me a job answering phones. And when the summer came along, they told me if I'd go get my entry-level certification, they'd give me a summer job coaching camps. And I honestly thought that was going to be it, and I was going to continue on as a hockey player / hockey coach. But doors just kept opening, and it just became so obvious that tennis was the way to go. My first boss was somebody who had also kind of mentored under Louis, and so he kind of opened those doors for me. And then once Louis took me under his wing, it was just such a vision was created for what I could do through tennis that was the obvious choice.
Yeah. I guess it's good for all of us that that's how it worked out in the end, even though maybe it wasn't. There was a bit of doubt maybe along the way that tennis would be the ultimate route, but I'm happy it was.
Yeah, not everybody feels that way, but thank you.
And yeah, just kind of, if you were to give some advice to young kind of maybe coaches who are looking to get started in the game, what kind of advice would you give to them?
Young coaches, well, from what this is what I'll say. There's a great book that I like that's called Artistry Unleashed It's by a woman named Hillary Austin. And so she talks about 3 things that are required to essentially master your field. And so the first one, I'll use my normal terminology instead of what she calls it in the book, but the first one is to understand why you're doing something. You better be really closely connected to what motivates you, what you're passionate about, because if you're not passionate about it, then there's just no chance that coaching is a good career for somebody who's not passionate. It's too hard. You know, like when I was spending 150,000 air miles a year and you know, working until midnight and working at 5 a.m. and you know, it's not a job for somebody who's not passionate about it. So first one, you better connect with your passion and make sure that it's something that you really want to do. But if it is something you want to do, then the second thing that she talks about is essentially get yourself educated. And then, you know, that is what I've done. And so I've been through every coaching course that anybody ever offered. I took it. Every coaching, you know, you mentioned the conference that Louis was just speaking at. As a matter of fact, the first coach I just referred to at my very first club, Wayne Elderton, also spoke at that Irish conference, funny enough. But in the end, you know, you've got to get educated. I believe strongly in that. And even when people played at a high level, I still think it's critical that they go and get education. It underpins a lot of what we do. And in the end, more than anything, if you're ever struggling, you can fall back onto formal things, you know, like Sean and Jack here have already been bugging me when I'll start talking about, you know, the physics formula for momentum and things like that, you know, but in the end, this education underpins our work. And so I think it's absolutely critical. And then the third one, if you're very passionate and you get a good education, then the third thing you need is experience. And so yeah, it's absolutely critical that you're willing to take every experience offered to you. And so for me, that meant leaving small town, suburban Vancouver at the time, and taking every job I could. I had 3 or 4 jobs around here as I kept growing and getting more opportunities. And that was all before I was 25 years old. And then at 25, I moved to Ireland, then Toronto, then England, then China, just trying to just grow in my own experiences. And so I think that's what it comes down to. If you're passionate, get yourself educated and say yes to every single possible experience, especially if it's around you know, a level of play that you haven't had a chance to be with yet, or an experienced coach that you could learn something from. You know, if you've got those 3 things, passion, education, and experience, you're going to be good.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. And what do you think is next for you? Obviously, you've been in this kind of center for a while. What do you see as the next few steps?
Well, this is it for me. You know, it's funny because I never even started with some master plan to build 3 tennis centers. And, you know, in a couple of years, if we have 3 or if we have 5, that's fine with me. It was never a goal about building centers. It was a goal about player development, and building the centers was a way to have an infrastructure, both with the right amount of courts and right amount of coaches and quite frankly, enough money, because it's an expensive journey to develop tennis players. And so, you know, we put this whole process in place for the plain, simple goal of developing professional tennis players. And you know, I can tell you in 2013, the Canadian girl I was coaching qualified for the main draw of the US Open. And so did James. He qualified for the main draw of the US Open. And so I had two players that I've been very heavily involved with playing in the main draw of the US Open. And as I say to people here, I'm determined that isn't the highlight of my coaching career. And so, you know, the goal is to develop more professional tennis players. The goal is to develop, you know, Grand Slam champions. And so we feel like we put the infrastructure in place now, and now we just got to get the work done.
That's it. No, yeah, it sounds like you have everything that you need and all the bits that can help you with that. And obviously hopefully that does turn out to be the case, and I'm sure it will, and you'll have lots of success. And just before we finish, Larry, I just want to come back briefly to talking about the scholarship that you've offered. And just if anyone it's Sean O'Neill and Jack McCarthy who are with you this year. And I guess how have they got on so far this year? And then the second part of my question is, like, do you have plans for this to be a thing next year with another couple of kids, or like how do you see that working as well?
Yeah, for sure. So firstly, you know, in case they happen to listen to this, I want to say thank you to, like I said, Garrett and James. We couldn't have put this together without them. They were instrumental. But also say thank you to the families, because I know it takes a lot of trust to send your kids across the world, and they knew me secondhand through James Cluskey or whatever it was. But you know, I really am grateful for the trust that they've shown us, and you know, we're doing our absolute best with the guys. So they've been here for only 10 days. It's already fantastic. I've always said probably the number one challenge I have in Canada is that I have much more of an Irish sense of humor than I do a Canadian sense of humor. And so it's so much fun having the guys. They're bringing a ton of energy. They're bringing a ton of fun, which is excellent. Sean, unfortunately, the first day, I don't think the guys, as I kind of alluded to earlier, I don't think their program was probably as intensive as it is here. And so the first day of training, after having a couple of days rest and recovery when they first got here, was 4 hours on court. And Sean really showed his toughness. But when I looked down at about hour 3, his grip was full of blood. And I was like, what the heck? And it turned out his hands were all blisters, and he was playing through the pain, which was, a valiant effort on his part. But it meant that, after our first day, he ended up having to take 4 days off, and then he came back on that and had a little muscle pull in his back. And so this morning was actually the first time that he was back on court in any major capacity since day one. So it's too bad that it started that way on the court for Sean. But we've loved having him here. He's a great addition. His personality has been great, and it's obvious the game he has. I'm really excited for him and his potential. I'm not even sure in my talks with him, he comes across a pretty confident kid, but I'm not quite sure he realizes how good he could be. And so, hopefully we can help him along that journey. And then Jack's been fantastic. Jack's been on court with us every day, and same thing, bringing a really fun energy to it, working hard. He fits in really well with the level of kids that we have here. And so, yeah, you know what, it's so important that you get to play new people. And so it's been a nice addition to our group to get a couple more good players. It's been a great addition to get their personality and their work ethic. So as far as I'm concerned, it's been fantastic for the first 10 days. And definitely the goal would be that this is a starting point for us. I would love to make this an annual thing. If the guys came, if I have the terminology right, I know it's always easiest. Is it called your transition year? Is that the way you call it? I know there's a little bit less responsibilities in school and things like that. So it's an easy one. I remember when McGee did his transition year, just doing work experience for me at Clontarf, which just meant playing tennis 10 hours a day, I think. But in the end, we would love to do this. If this works out for Tennis Ireland, if it's something that we can do, then I feel great that I get a little chance to give back to a country that was so important to me. And if it works out for the guys, then that would be fantastic. It's already clear to me it works out for us. So yeah, let's hope it's a continuous thing. We're loving it.
That's great to hear. It's great to hear that they're getting on well, and obviously great to hear that hopefully it is something that'll turn into a regular thing, and even more kids can get the opportunity over the next few years would be brilliant.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
The one thing that Garrett was saying, and I don't do these types of things to do any shameless plugs or anything, but obviously we're open to being able to support players at any point in their development. So if anybody, I know that it's a fairly common thing, even having lunch with the lads, and they'll be sitting there saying, oh yeah, this player is in Spain right now, and this player is in England right now. If somebody is looking for a good place where they know that their kids will be well taken care of on and off the court, then we're happy to help anybody. But as far as this particular program, yeah, 100%. Hopefully we can keep it going.
Brilliant. And before we finish up, Larry, I just want to ask you a final question. What's your favorite thing about tennis?
What's my favorite thing about tennis?
Favorite thing about tennis, yeah.
Man, that's the kind of question you should give somebody some lead time for. This is what I'll say. When there's a sports psychologist that I've done a lot of work with, and he would always suggest that tennis is the hardest sport in the world mentally. And his logic is that all individual sports are automatically harder than team sports mentally because you're on your own. And then he would say that tennis is the only individual sport that's actually driven by errors. And so if you win the US Open, in those 7 matches, you probably, I don't know, what did you make, 20 unforced errors a match on average, maybe more, I don't know. Is it 140 errors you made and you're the Grand Slam champion? Whereas if you think of other individual sports like golf, maybe in 4 rounds, you made 4 or 5 bogeys. I don't know, maybe you made 4 or 5 mistakes. And so he's saying that being on your own in a sport that's driven by mistakes makes it the hardest sport in the world mentally. And it's funny because that's all a setup to say I completely disagree with them. My wife was a national champion figure skater, and so I ended up watching a lot of figure skating at the Olympics and different things. And when I look at these sports that you have to be perfect to win, now that's some serious stress, So maybe my favorite thing about tennis is that you can win 51% of the points and win every match you ever played. It's a very forgiving sport that way. And even I remember at one point when I was coaching that girl on the WTA tour, I was trying to show her because she had moved from like the 200s and the 100s, and she'd broken into the top 100. So instead of playing a whole bunch of challenger type of events, she was going to start to play all the WTA events. And I went through the rankings, and there was a girl that year, if I remember correctly, it might have been Nadia Petrova, who was like 9 in the world and had a significantly losing record. She'd won like 6 matches and lost 17. It just happened that all 6 were in 2 Grand Slams. And so making the 4th round of 2 Grand Slams put her in the top 10 of the world, even though she'd lost every other match that year. So I love that you can keep losing, whether that's losing points, losing games, losing matches, and you can still be successful. I love that about tennis. It makes it so that it's a sport that's built for the resilient, right? A lot of people can't handle that level of losing. It chips away at their confidence and belief, and pretty soon they're done. But I really believe tennis epitomizes that saying. That's like, you only fail if you quit. As long as you keep going, you've always got a chance to win. So very philosophical answer. You were probably asking me about Federer or something, but I'd say that's my off the cuff answer.
No, it's an interesting one because it takes, like what you said at the start of that, like about the errors, it kind of takes that on its head almost of, the errors are there, but that's not what it's about kind of, and you can still win. I like that. That's very interesting. Now, Larry, obviously a big thanks for your time again. And, it's great to hear about all your journey and all the different kind of roles that you've had over the years, and all the very best in with the centres you have in Canada. And now I'm sure it's gonna be very successful, and it's great to hear about the Irish connection, and hope it stays that way. And thanks very much, and all the very best.
Thank you, Adam. I appreciate that. And if anybody wants to track the boys' results, our academy is called the P3 Tennis Academy, which stands for People, Passion, Performance. But if you go to p3tennisacademy.ca, that has, we'll be updating Sean and Jack along with all the other teams' results on there. So if you want to track how they're doing, feel free to jump over there and take a look.
That's great, brilliant. I'll mention that link in the description as well, so we can if people can check that out. That's great.
A big thanks once again to Larry for his time with this episode. I really enjoyed getting to hear all about his coaching journey and his stories from Ireland and from elsewhere. I hope you enjoyed this episode as well. If you did, please consider subscribing to the show, leaving a comment, and also telling some friends about the show that you think might also enjoy it. A big thanks, and until next time, I've been Adam, and goodbye.